This is Jed MacKay, and welcome to a special episode of Power of X-Men.
Boom! What's up, familia? Dayspring here with a very special episode of Power of X-Men. We have Jed MacKay himself on the show today. Jed, what's going on?
Just ready to have a chat about comic books. Thanks for having me on.
I imagine this is kind of a full circle moment for you because if I remember correctly, that To Serve and Protect issue with Dazzler was your first paying gig in comics. And now you're spearheading the relaunch of X-Men in a post-Krakoa age.
Yeah, it's kind of come around. Yeah, that was my first job was a book that had X-Men on the title, and now we're back. But unfortunately, not with Dazzler. But we can't have everything in life.
No, but Dazzler's over. She's getting her spotlight with Jason, which is
Yeah,
really great. And you guys were at Fan Expo together over the weekend.
Jason is going to Dazzler so hard. He's written a pop song for every issue, full lyrics and everything. I don't think he's got them recorded or put to music, but it's a real devotion to the racket that I'm really impressed with. So I'm looking forward to the book coming out and seeing what people think of it. But yeah, Jason's been working his ass off on it.
Yeah, we were talking to him about it, and he mentioned the lyrics and how he's hoping that fans are going to be able to look at that and make it their own, start
Mm,
playing them, which I have to tell you is like next level.
yeah, it's pretty incredible stuff.
So, you started off with Dazzler with that To Serve and Protect issue, and here you are about 14 years later, and you're spearheading from the ashes with a really great X-Men team. And I'm curious, the Jed of yesterday, what do you think would surprise him the most about this journey you've had in comic books?
That it actually succeeded. I mean, going back in well, or maybe not. Like going back to 2010, I did that first story. I thought that was going to be my in, this is my breaking in moment. I just started going to school to get my bachelor's of education. I was like, oh wow, maybe this is going to be a turning point. Maybe I don't have to be a teacher after all. Um, so maybe the Jet of 2010 would have been yeah, of course, this is where we're at. But if I'm yeah, but this is 14 years later, he'd be oh, yeah, I expected that to go a little quicker. I'm yeah, sorry, buddy.
I love the journey you've had because, last time we spoke with you, we were at Masters of Comic Books with our
Mhm.
co-host over there, Cole, and you've done Daughters of the Dragon, you've done Moon Knight, you've done Blood Hunt. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just such a wonderful journey that has brought you here to the X-Men. Oh, and the Avengers as well. Sorry.
Those little guys.
You may have heard of the Avengers Familia,
Yeah.
but I have to tell you, and I said this to you when we spoke a couple years ago. Every time I pick up one of those issues that's written by you, I feel like I get so much bang for my buck in that
I hope so.
issue. And it's very, you kind of framed it to me where you're like, you're asking readers to come along on a journey with you for 22 pages, and you want to make sure that they have something to latch onto and they feel that
Yeah.
something happened.
And they have something to show for the however much they have to spend on a comic. If I want to buy a single issue in Canada, it's like $5. So
Yeah.
that's it's not nothing. Um, so you want to make sure that, and it's tough too on a monthly schedule. It's not manga. It's not a new thing out every week. You got to give people enough. Hopefully, again, don't doesn't always work, but to hold them over till next month, because again, you could also have an issue come out early one month and late the next month, and it's a real gap. So you really try to help people out as much as you can outside of the when things are collected and it's not really a problem.
Yeah, it's funny. I've never really I mean, I've thought about it, but I've never really conceptualized it until this moment where there is a specific writing approach you have to take to these monthly issues. And I think in the past, if I've ever been frustrated with an issue, it has nothing to do with the overall pacing or writing, but the fact that it is not serialized, it's not manga, it's not a trade paperback. You have to wait till the next month. And that, if
Yeah.
there's like a delay, we don't get as many delays anymore, but if
Yeah.
there's like a 6 month delay between issue 4 and 5, you're like, whoa, you know?
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I saying that that doesn't happen as much anymore. That's a good point because I seem to remember like kind of like in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, those big delays were so common. And
Yeah.
nowadays, if there's like 6 months between two issues, that's just it's not coming back, you know,
Yeah. Well,
unless
it's
it's something enormously important. But even then, like if there's 6 months between two issues of a Marvel book, that is so enormously important that it's going to continue as opposed to just like disappear forever, then someone really a disaster has really occurred here.
Well, it's interesting because the first series that comes to mind is Astonishing X-Men, and we had that very Emma focused arc. I believe it was called Torn, and it was like 6 months between one issue to the next, and
No.
it was so big in the early aughts, and that just doesn't happen anymore. And I remember when Ten of Swords was coming out, when Jordan D. White was the group editor, and we were talking with him, and I said, "Man, I was ready for that book to be delayed because of the pandemic, because of everything, but you guys kept such a tight editorial schedule, and it looks like it's carried through." I don't I'm sure someone can always prove me wrong, and slide into our DMs, but the editorial schedule in recent years, post pandemic, has been extremely tight.
Yeah, I mean it's not something I can really speak to on the other side of that because for we talked about my career starting essentially 14 years ago, 2010,
Hmm.
but really it's like it's only been a career since like mid to late 2018, so like 5.5, 6 years or so. So basically, in my whole time there, that's just how it's been. You get your scripts in at this day, so the artist can get their art in at this day, and then meanwhile, the letterer and the colorist are working on it. It's just the way it's been. I'm not going to say I've never been late on a script, but certainly not by very much, and certainly not very often because it's just the way it's done. You got to get your stuff in on time. So I've never found there to be an alternative.
What's it been like joining the X office in this post Krakoan era we find ourselves in? Do you guys have the X-Men Slack or Discord, whatever they were using before? What's been the vibe like?
For me, it's kind of Tom a lot, and then Tom had just taken over the X-Men, which I think is no small part of why I was asked to write an X title. Because I've been working on Avengers with Tom for a while. I've been working with him on Moon Knight prior to that. So at that point, most of my work was going through Tom. So doing another book for Tom wasn't exactly a big shift. But being in sort of an editorial group certainly was because while you have something like the Avengers ties into all the individual solo titles, the characters who are Avengers, the X stuff is much more tightly connected and or much more of a group, I suppose. So yeah, we use I set up a Discord just so we could just so the writers could do our horse trading and see who's using what character. Um, ask if anybody knows about this thing, if these characters have met. It's not particularly interesting. I know people are like, oh, these creators have these secret like chat rooms where they discuss all these interesting things. It's not really that interesting, but it's just kind of it's just very functional. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think there's been so much curiosity with how you all communicate because of the pandemic. You guys really set the model, or at least publicly set the model of how X-Men writers sort of communicate. You guys are on Discord, all that stuff. And, I think with From the Ashes, you see that same synchronized behavior and storytelling for sure. And that's why I think people always like to like peek behind the curtain and see who's
Yeah.
dropping those memes in there. We know Leah Williams loved to drop her memes into the X-Men Slack.
Yeah, I think we're a little less exciting than the X Slack was. But it's been great. Like I think the solicits are out for the first part of the raid on Grey Malkin.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have a crossover with X-Men and Uncanny. Having to be in pretty close communication with Gale is pretty important to make that thing work because it's gone through a few iterations, some things have changed. But I think we're at a spot with it that I'm really happy with it, and Ryan's working on the first script of it now, so it's gonna be pretty cool.
So let's dive into your run because so
Sure.
many of our familia is been so excited for you joining the X-Men team. How did this book come about? Did you pitch Tom? Did Tom come to you? What was sort of the DNA of this?
So basically, once Tom took over the X office, he sat down, he wrote this. It was like 15, 20 page kind of Bible of what he wanted the kind of the outlines, what he wanted the whole line to look like. And in it, he said we want to have 3X teams. One's going to be a Rogue Gambit one, one's going to be a Scott Magneto Beast one, one's going to be an Emma and Kitty one. I don't remember the specifics of it, what would become exceptional. I'm pretty sure it was an Emma Kitty focused one. And he said, I'd like to see what thoughts you have for one of the the X-Men titles. And so it immediately, on adjectiveless X-Men was one that appealed to me. I like Cyclops a lot. I've always like Beast. Magneto's great. I don't want to write an accent, so Gambit Rogue are right out there. But also the Uncanny Team sounded more like what I was already doing in Avengers, whereas the X-Men book seemed like it would give me the opportunity to do something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of where it came from. Then from there, I pitched my ideas. I kept the characters that Tom wanted. I moved around with some of the ideas. Like I think his original idea was they're going to hang out in like Magneto's weird island base, and I was like, I feel like that doesn't quite work for me. Like you got to put them near people. Despite the fact we were stuck in Alaska, but at least they're in the United States. Near a town. And then, if there's a few other angles that we've sort of finessed or switched around. We went back and forth on the roster a fair amount. It's so I guess the answer to the question is that I pitched, but I was invited to pitch. And ultimately, what ideas I had seemed to appeal with what Tom wanted to do.
I'm glad that you put the X-Men in Alaska because Alaska is huge for the mutants. So much has happened there. I mean, Messiah Complex, Madeline Pryor, to name a few, but also in a Sentinel making factory, and that the town was dependent off of the economy and the money it brought in. Yeah, the industry that it brought in. I mean, how did that idea kind of come into play? I mean, I don't want to blow so much smoke here, but it's a genius idea.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. I think I was just part of it was a lot like it kind of thought process went. I was like, well, Alaska makes a lot of sense because Scott's from Alaska, and that would be cool. I'm like, well, where can I set them up? And I immediately wanted to have something that was visually essentially the opposite of Krakoa, where instead of lush, tropical, verdant plants everywhere, instead it was, cold, industrial, busted down kind of a situation. And also, I've always been a big Metal Gear Solid fan, so I'm like, I'll essentially set them on Shadow Moses Island.
Yes.
But yeah, like it seemed to work. And then once I kind of figured out that, I started connecting the dots. I'm like, well, what if it was a Sentinel factory previously? I think that like that thought process probably harkens back to Force or X Factor, who were living in a abandoned murder world at one point.
Getting myself, but we'll fact check that.
It's like I don't think I've read that run, but I've always loved that idea.
Yeah.
And then it gradually ties into a lot of the themes that we're working with in this era, and specifically in X-Men. Of these are people who have to take the broken things in the world around them, repurpose them to build a life with them. So taking a broken Sentinel factory and making it into their home. In the same way, they don't have a new shiny Blackbird. They use, the Marauder 2 from Marauders as their ship. These are people who are forced to take what they can and create and use that to help create a life and create a future for themselves, because the future they had anticipated or the future that they were living no longer exists. It was taken from. And then having figured that out, then I went and backfilled to set it up in Avengers when the Avengers trashed the factory when Orcus was running it.
It's such an interesting position that the mutants are in right now, following everything that happened with Krakoa and them finding themselves in specifically in your title in Alaska at this old Sentinel factory and sort of inheriting, secondhand stuff. I'm curious for a character like Cyclops, where, historically he's always had this big overarching story, and now it's almost like, I don't want to say like fresh start after what we just talked about, but he certainly is in a new position in life. And I'm curious, when you hone in on Cyclops, especially in this post Krakoan world, what's his mindset like? How do you see that? What is your approach to him?
Well, I mean, first off, like the most important thing for Cyclops is always that he's under a tremendous amount of pressure because he sees himself as being responsible for essentially. I mean, first off, he's responsible for this team of mutants he's put together, all of whom are, or sorry, none of whom are particularly well suited towards reintegration with the human world. You've got Temper, who is in jail at Krakoa. You have Magic, who's half a demon on a good day. Juggernaut, who's a villain, or sorry, former supervillain. Kid Omega, who's a former mutant terrorist. Scott Summers, who's a former mutant terrorist. Psylocke, who's a former ninja assassin. Like these are not people who are well suited towards reintegrating in sapien society in the same way the NYX kids would be, for instance. So he's got, first off, these people who he's responsible for, but also in a post Xavier world, Xavier's dream doesn't apply anymore, or doesn't apply in the uniform way that it once did. Instead, it's open market on whose dream is going to be the next one. And Scott sees himself as having to provide a certain amount of guidance, or be a certain pole star for mutants, because someone has to. And so he's doing what he thinks is right, and doing what he thinks is right in the best way that he can. Which, I mean, it wouldn't be Scott Summers if he didn't screw up somehow, some respect, to make life more difficult. But he can't do anything but try.
I love that perspective. Because I think when you think of him during the Messiah Complex era, all the way through AVX, even post that, he tried. He was the one who came up and was like, listen, we got to solve this problem that's going on with the mutants and everything that happened with House of M. And I think a lot of people around him underestimate him. And they're always like, oh, Cyclops is ready to fuck up. And one of those during that era was a Hank McCoy Beast, who you have on the team now, but it's not the Beast we've known from that era. It's the reboot of him during the Avengers era, for when he was resurrected in X-Force.
Yeah, so we've got Hank is in many respects. So Scott is the overall leader of the team and the leader of the field team, whereas Hank is the base director. He's in charge of the the facility, of the people kind of living there, as well as his own project that he's been working on, to distraction. But yeah, I think Hank is a tremendously interesting character. I've always loved the Beast, and I've always, I know a lot of people were upset with kind of the direction he took in X-Force and in Wolverine in recent years, but I mean, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a perfect trajectory for the way that character's been written for years. But what's interesting now is we have a younger version of that character who sees what he could potentially become and wonders how, if that is inescapable. Is there change? Is there any way to change one's stars? And we're going to see Alex Pacnell is going to explore that a bit too in the Infinity comics. But yeah, Hank McCoy is tremendously intelligent. So it's not hard for him to trace the through line of the thinking that would lead, him to eventually become the now deceased Bad Beast, or whatever you want to call him. But there's going to be a lot of questions as to, is this a thing that he can escape? How can he change what may be waiting for him? Was Bad Beast right? There's a lot to work with there. But also, he's missing an enormous piece of his own history. I mean, this has got to be prior to even being an X Factor.
Yeah.
So he's operating at a huge learning deficit, both scientifically. He's used to being the smartest guy in the world, and now he's, with the flying time scale, I can say how many years he's missing. But he's decidedly behind the state of the art at this point in time. And he's playing catch up, trying to be the scientist and the engineer that everyone around him needs him to be. And at the same time, too, there's people who have been X-Men for years that he's never met, essentially, to the point where, he's perhaps has fonder memories of Temper when they're both in all new X-Men together than, someone like, Gambit, who he'd never met before.
I never thought about it like that. You're absolutely right. He has no idea who Gambit is. He's not going to know sort of
or what he's saying.
Yeah. That's actually really fascinating for a character like Hank, and I never thought about it like that. I've been one of those people who've definitely over the last few years have, I would say jokingly, but I know sometimes it probably comes across a little bit more facetious, that hasn't really tolerated Hank in, I think, around more since era, but especially with AVX and all new X-Men. But I like the idea that we have this Hank that's pre-X Factor. I mean, to him, Jean is still dead. He's answering that call from Dark Phoenix and going to join the X-Men. I mean, he's really going to have to come a lot of X-Men history, and that puts him in a really curious position because, in that first issue, I was kind of looking at him. I'm like, oh, what is this beast up to? He looks a little sly here talking to the sheriff, but I think maybe it's less about being sly and more about him trying to piece together and seeing that through line of what's going to bring him to where he was before this reboot.
Or maybe that could just be your own prejudices.
Are you suggesting a prejudice against Hank McCoy?
Well, but that's the thing, is you're not alone in that, both, in our world, but also in comic books, because everyone's seen him, essentially be a psychotic war criminal. He has, practically destroyed an entire South American nation. That was just in X-Force. So I think there's a lot of people who are not willing to give Hank McCoy the benefit of the doubt, even though from his perspective, these are things he's never done and would never countenance in a million years. But as it turned out, one version of him would countenance, and not, it didn't take a million years to get there. So I think he's a great character, and I think he's a really in a really interesting spot. And I also like that Ryan draws him like more Perez-y, so that's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, he's definitely very Perez-y. I mean, that is a great way of summing it up. But speaking of great characters, tell us about Psylocke. All eyes on Psylocke. The amount of DMs that come in for Quanon, everyone loves this character, and you have her under your charge.
Yeah, so Psylocke, Quanon, which is that the right pronunciation? I never know.
I say Quanon. I could be 100% wrong, but
yeah, because I remember reading somewhere that was like, it was the name was like misromanized or something back in the 80s, but also like, anyways, regardless, we'll go with Quanon. It's fine for now. I think she's a really interesting character. I think her development through the Krakoan era in Hellions was really fantastic. And I was actually just going over the final version of number 5, which has a real Quanon and Quentin focus. But yeah, I think she's a really interesting character to me because she's had that great development through Hellions. She's someone who's been through so much. And again, she has been an antagonist to the X-Men for so long, and her finding a place in this world is difficult for her. And that's, the X-Men need her because obviously she brings a lot to the team, but she also needs the X-Men because, as she gets into in number 5, speaking with Mr. John Greycrow, she was created to be a weapon.
Yeah,
she was conditioned and built for a purpose, and that purpose was, usually killing and hurting people. She says that's behind her, but what will never leave her is that, a weapon needs to be of use, a tool needs to be of use. And that's what she gets from the X-Men, is she's able to feel that she has a purpose, which, I think is quite sad for a human being to have to think like that, or, mutant. But that's where she's at, and that's where she's trying to break out of and develop. But, I think she's a great character. She's someone who's very popular with readers, and retailers, and artists, and everybody. Everybody loves Psylocke. She's got a great look. She's got, just a very cool character. She's got a cool name. Um, she's largely the sort of second adult on the field team.
Mm.
Essentially the XO, or second in command of the field team, because everyone else is kind of going off in all their own directions. Whereas Psylocke is, she's a professional. She's very dependable. She gets things done, and no matter what the odds. So that's kind of where she's standing here, where she's trying to find out who she is in this new world, and as hanging out with the X-Men to figure it out. And then also I was talking to Alyssa Wong about the series they're writing, which it's going to be great. They're telling me about some of the stuff they're getting up to, and I think people are going to really enjoy it.
Well, we're excited for that series by Alyssa. Alyssa is a fabulous writer, and if we're gonna get a Psylocke series, we're so happy that she's the one writing it. There,
Yeah.
there are two things that come to mind when we think of Psylocke, especially when she's with Cyclops, which one of them was in the early 90s when Betsy had the mantle. She was blaming the quantum persona taking over her and responsible for licking oil off of Cyclops's face, if you remember that.
Yeah, we're not taking that one out of the cupboards for the moment. She's, Psylocke, she's got her own complex a relationship issues currently, as does Scott. So I'm like, well, we'll maybe a little later if you want to explore that, but we'll leave the oil away at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, it's refreshing to see that she is second in command and she is that other adult on the team that Cyclops is going to be able to rely on. And we love that evolution of her character. The other thing with her that always I always felt deeply was that the body swap happened and she found herself in this other body that had the legacy virus and she had to wrongly die as a result. So it's just, again, it's wonderful.
Did she still have the robot eyes at that point too?
I think she did have the robot eyes. You're right. She got body swapped, had to get the robot eyes.
Man,
and then
what a fucking lemon.
Yeah. And now, now she's back and it seems that the character has been course corrected. And I'm telling you, it's someone who's been reading these books for like 3 decades. It's just good to see her just leading the team, being the adult, and getting her own solo series in a couple of months. But it's just good to see her there.
Yeah, no, I think she's really flourished through Krakoa, and we just want to keep that streak going for her because I think she's a great character who can really carry a lot.
Okay, well, speaking of characters who are not adults and are not a second in command, Quentin Quire is on the team. Magneto was right. He originated the shirt. He has been a thorn in a lot of teams. What can you tell us about Quentin, your overall plans for Mr. Kid Omega?
I mean, like this, I've always Quentin. That new X-Men run was kind of first runs of X-Men that I read where I'm like, okay, like this is like my thing. Like this is like my run, what I'm considering my sort of formative thing. I was buying Previews magazine when it was first being advertised. And I was like, wow, this like looks like such a departure from what had come before. Not to say what had come before was bad or anything, but it was just so visually distinct that it really made you sit up and take notice. And I really enjoyed Quentin as a part of that. And to another extent, one of my other favorite kind of modern runs was that Wolverine and X-Men one that Jason Aaron was writing, where Quentin also played a big part. But yeah, like Quentin is a shitty little loudmouth, and he's very much filling a Hawkeye kind of position in our team. The like old Hawkeye when he's just there, like saying Cap's a jerk, and then he later on it's like kicking a can down the road. It's like, oh, I feel like a real bum talking to Cap like that. He's such a swell guy. But yeah, he's the voice of the opposition. And I think that's important to have, especially in a team like the X-Men. It's something I realized I was kind of lacking in Avengers, given that they're all such big iconic characters. And I wanted to have someone who would kind of give everybody grief, who would just deserve it or not. And, there's something I think that's very appealing about Quentin in that he's, a massively insecure character. He's someone who he's never been comfortable in his own skin. He's never been comfortable in human society or mutant society, or when he is, it's all too transitory, and he makes up for it by being an asshole. And there's something I find very very relatable about that, where he kind of represents a lot of the worst parts of all of us. And
Yeah.
I think we can also relate to the bad parts of ourselves and characters, not just the good things. Also, the thing is, I really like him, and no one else seems to, and I find that very entertaining. He's sort of the lightning rod for criticism. Both, people say, well, why is he on this team when my favorite character is not? And then, of course, you've got the chuds on the other side who are like, oh, look at this pink hair guy on the team, blah blah blah. I'm like, oh yeah, how incredibly predictable. Fantastic business. And also, it's the X-Men. They need a telepath. That's just the way the X-Men work.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a lot of questions always come in when a new title is announced, and I can't, if we get them here at Power of X-Men, I can't even imagine you guys. But it's like, why did they choose this character over that? And you're like, let's just see the story first. A, but B, it's funny that you said that you like Quentin, because I think I don't know some of the other writers, but I like that someone who cares about the character and actually understands the character is sort of spearheading him right now. Because one of the things during New X-Men, I didn't like Quentin, but that does not mean I didn't like him as a character or his writing, or that you didn't understand him. I think Morrison laid a lot of great groundwork for the character, and I would epitomize his character when he was at that payphone, finding out that he was adopted. And then, I'm forgetting the character's name, the one who was very charismatic playing the guitar. Then he's like, your mutant powers to show that you're charismatic, but I'm going to expose you in the truth, and sort of humiliates this guy. And, you really see that this
Slick.
Slick, you're right. Absolutely. Yeah, it was Slick. And that he has this deep insecurity in him, and he wants to lash out at the world. And I don't want to say that's been missing from the characters these last few years, but he's definitely led more with attitude versus what's underneath that attitude and what's making this character act like this.
Yeah, and we're picking up with him after a really extremely traumatic period through X-Force when Sabretooth was carrying his head around for a while. So, I think there's a lot of kind of layers to peel on him, and also kind of seeing how he's developed in those intervening years.
Another character that you have too on the team who's had a couple eventful years is Temper. We're happy to see her front and center. What was really interesting about that character as well is that she came in during the Five Lights era when mutants were just being repopulated. And, she had her saga on Krakoa. She was in prison. What's the character's mindset coming into X-Men and From the Ashes?
She's another character that I have a lot of affection for from Wolverine and the X-Men days. And also, that Five Lights period through Schism or Schism, however you want to pronounce it, was, I think, such an interesting time for the X-Men. Because, like I said, I was really into Wolverine and the X-Men, but that was a direct result of, the Schism days. And, that issue of, I think it was Generation Hope, when they're just sitting there waiting for that wild sentinel to cross the San Francisco Bay to get to them, and it's not like it's gonna be there in like 2 minutes. They got to sit there and like basically wait for this giant death monster to walk over and kill them. It's such an interesting time, but I think she's it's good to have younger characters on the team, on a team like X-Men. Especially because, unlike an Uncanny or Exceptional, we're not introducing new young mutants to bring in. But I think she brings a really interesting perspective, is that she's the only mutant, certainly on our team, and perhaps at all, that does not miss Krakoa. She was very badly treated by Krakoa. And as such, she has none of the nostalgia, none of the grief for it that everyone else does. Instead, it was a very difficult time for her, and I think that's really interesting. as she calls out in the issue that's out this week, she says, you know, even Hank misses Krakoa, and he was never there. Uh, so I think in the same way, Quentin is sort of in opposition to the leadership of the X-Men just because he's being an asshole. You know, Temper's also very much in opposition to this, you know, whitewashing of the reputation of Krakoa. That there was nothing wrong with it, that it was, you know, a perfect and ideal place, because that was not her experience. And having been treated badly by that government, by that system, that's something that she carries with her.
I mean, Jed, I have to tell you, that is a perfect interpretation of the character. And again, I didn't even think about that. I think as X fans, you know, leaving Krakoa, and this could be our own biasness as readers, but Krakoa is remembered so fondly among so many right
Oh yeah,
now
no,
that,
for sure.
and by the way, I was there calling out some of the crap too, but even after, I'm just like, oh, Krakoa, it was this mutant paradise. We forget that there were plenty of cracks in the system, and someone like
Sure.
Temper sort of fell victim to it. So she's going to be like, yeah, fuck this place. Like, I'm happy not to be in the pit anymore. I'm happy to
Yeah.
be out and about and be an active field member.
Yeah, and, you know, which isn't me just being an asshole and being like, "Oh, you guys talk about you miss Krakoa, you don't like the new stuff we're doing. Well, Krakoa sort of suck too." Like, no, it's not that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I think it's important to just look at the different viewpoints coming from such
yeah.
a historic period of the X-Men, and you know, looking at how anytime there's a change in something, we naturally look back and say, "Well, this was a golden age that shall never be matched." And paper over a lot of the, you know, the problems and the difficulties and, you know, the structural inequities that existed in that.
One of the things that put the biggest smile on my face reading your series so far was the relationship between Magic and Juggernaut, and seeing them kind of do rock paper and throwing themselves out there. Um, what can you tell us about how you're building the chemistry for both those characters? What's in store? They both obviously have very contentious backgrounds, but they
Sure.
seem to have found some kind of camaraderie here, which is fun to see.
Yeah, Magic is very much like sort of my counterpoint for Psylocke,
Hmm.
whereas they're both, you know, they're both extremely capable women who carry big swords. But you know, Psylocke is extremely professional. She's on point. She's on task. Whereas Magic is just like super rowdy and is generally starting as many problems as she solves. Is not to say that, you know, I think a couple issues down the line, there's going to be, you know, we see Temper and Magic team up for, I think, X-Men number 6.
Hmm.
And you know, Temper calls out. She's like, "You're actually a lot more." That's because, you know, she's never spent much time with Magic in the past. You know, she says, "You know, you're a lot smarter, a lot more capable than you like to let on." Magic is essentially like, "Yeah, but don't tell anyone else. They'll make me do more things." Um, where, you know, she's in it for a good time. She's down to clown. She's ready to rampage, and Juggernaut is the perfect companion for that. They get in there in the thick of it and cause problems. Which isn't to say, you know, she can't cast spells. You know, she was a sorcerer supreme for a long time. Um, but it always seems like her heart is sort of in the fray, and she's someone who has, you know, some deep sadnesses and some deep difficulties, but, you know, hides them under that exterior.
Well, and it's interesting. I'm just piecing this together right now. Magic and Psylocke would have a lot in common because they both died from the legacy virus,
Yeah,
technically. So
for
they do
sure.
have that deep sadness, and they do have that, you know, ability to like come together and see trauma and like rise above it.
And also, you know, we don't know where her brother is,
Yeah.
or the one she likes.
So you've teased already team ups, the crossover that was announced. Is there anything in terms of your overall story that you can give us just a morsel of a tease for the fans at home who are just eagerly awaiting the next news announcement?
I don't know if there's really much more I can say that hasn't already been announced. Every 2 months, you're getting 2 issues a month. So I don't think there's a whole lot I can say other than, you know, we've got this crossover with Uncanny that's coming that's going to really shake things up. Um, which I guess you could probably gather if you saw that first cover of Rogue punching out Cyclops.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and then as well, we've got some pretty exciting stuff coming on. Generally everyone's free to do their own thing, but there's a few things coming up that's gonna start tightening that net, so to speak, and bringing all the various books together in ways that we hadn't seen before so far in this line. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting. It's some neat stuff, some shifts in the status quo.
Yeah, I have to tell you, when I was sort of soliciting questions for our interview today, a lot of people wanted to know when things were going to start coming together. And it's so funny because on one hand, you'll have a group of the fandom that says crossover fatigue. But then when there is no sign of a crossover, people are like, when is the next crossover? So
Yeah,
I think people are going to be really excited to see what you and Gail are doing, as well as Jason. In terms of, these first two issues that we've read and the third coming out, I see a lot of Morrison's influence here, especially with the U-Men, with Kid Omega, and I was curious, is that intentional? You mentioned that you're a big Morrison fan, and how do you find that some of the seeds that they planted back in 2000 still being relevant today?
I think it's just there's with any Morrison penned book, there's going to be a surfeit. Wait, that means no. I think it's not enough. There's surplus of just really big and exciting ideas that never really seem to go that far to style. Um, so it's rich territory to kind of like pick over like a vulture, as we often do when writing superhero comics. And, Morrison has always been a writer who is very very prescient in a lot of ways, but also very canny about you know you know stuff that they're writing about 20 some years ago. It's still valid. It's still useful. Not everything, of course, but I mean, whose is? So uh, I think it's less. I guess I certainly hope it's less of just sort of trying to ape that style and try to do something as good as they can and inevitably fail, but more take direction from these ideas and work on them in a way that we can in order to make our book our own.
Would you say Morrison and their run is one of your favorite eras of X-Men? Because, it's funny, when I was growing up reading these books, I did take a pause after Onslaught, maybe around the 12. And
Sure.
what brought me back was the Morrison era, because much like you, I was seeing the preview pages come in as they were being published. And I was like, oh, I got to check this out. And everyone was talking about Morrison.
Yeah, I mean, it has always been a favorite, but I also found it very much a formative run in that it keyed into X-Men in a way that I hadn't necessarily experienced before in these kind of big heady ideas, like just the way that Weapon Plus was recontextualized through that, or essentially Weapon Plus was created through that. And linking Captain America to Weapon X was such a big brain idea that came out of nowhere and then opened up so many other possibilities. Um, and you got to see a lot of some of the weirdo stuff that you didn't always see, like the Zoran special class of fuck up mutants. That was just something I found really interesting, because there's a lot of mutants who have shitty powers, and there's just like a lot of shitty people who became mutants, like not shitty like as in evil, but just kind of like shitheads. And seeing essentially the Xavier School D students, I was something that was kind of stuck with me, because I'm like, yeah, of course, those people exist. Not everyone's going to become an X-Man. Not everyone wants to become an X-Man, but yeah, there's just a lot of stuff in there that I really enjoy. There is stuff that didn't age particularly well. Beast pretending that he's gay, for instance.
That's the
But
original sin. That's why I always pinpointed.
on the whole, I think it's a run that has pound for pound just so many ideas per page that and again I read it at the right time too, which is a lot of where your formative stuff comes from.
Who is your favorite X character? If you had to pick one X character. I know that's, I mean, depending on the day, mine switches. So,
Yeah, it's tough because I mean, when it comes to writing superhero comics, you try to make whoever you're writing at the time your favorite.
mhm.
Um, so I guess if I'm gonna say who my favorite X character is, I'm gonna cop out and say Alpha Flight because I think they count as X characters.
Well, you have the Canadian ties right there.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that so much. What about a least favorite X character?
See, that's professionally difficult because if I'm like, if I'm like, you know what, fuck Gambit, and then somebody in the line like, hey, do you want to do a Gambit book? I'm like, sure, and then like he went on the podcast saying he hated Gambit. Um, but I mean, I think there's certainly characters that perhaps I'm just less interested in or less suited for. But again, nothing I'd want to say publicly.
No, that's really fair, man. It's, I always talk about this when we have guests on the podcast or we're holding like kind of like forums. When you say you don't like a character, it's not necessarily you hate like the DNA of the character. You have to
Sure,
differentiate what is editorial and creation and what is the history of the character. So for me, my stock answer is usually Beast. But it's never to say that
sure,
I think the IP of Beast is bad, that
yeah,
I have a personal vendetta. It's like, no, think of this character as a real person in this fictional universe. I would not like their history. It's sort of where I would always land on like questions like that. So I feel you
yeah.
on the professional conundrum of having someone asking you who is
Yeah.
your least favorite character, especially on an X-Men podcast.
There's always something interesting in the mental exercise to try and rehabilitate a character that you don't like. Like, I mean, I feel like every once in a while I'll come back and like, is there anything you can do with Adam X the Extreme? Like, is there
Uh,
can something be done with this
I,
guy, or like is he just like straight trash? But I'm like, there's got to be something you can do with him.
no, there is. We literally were just talking about this on the podcast the other day. Adam X is probably in my top 10 favorite characters. And I said, if we just get a writer who knows how to handle him, a writer maybe like you, Jed, who can handle Adam X and give a very compelling story, you can make him very interesting to a whole group of readers. But Adam X definitely gets the
Sure.
bottom of the barrel X characters.
Yeah. And I mean, like but see, like there's a challenge in there that's interesting, exciting because anytime you're given a job to work with characters, you have to figure out what it is about the character that excites you and how you can spin that out. Pull on that thread to the point where everyone else can be excited by that as well. Like when I first got Black Cat, I didn't have any particular affection for Felicia because she was just another character. But I was like, well, this is my job now, and then so I'm gonna look at this character and see what I can do with her that I would find interesting. And then that kind of really snowballed into her becoming one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, well, your run on Black Cat is one of our favorite books out there, as well as Moon Knight. And it's not that I wasn't a Moon Knight fan, I just didn't read Moon Knight. And your series came out or was coming out when the
Yeah,
show came
no,
out.
no, no, nobody did. That's why the book kept getting canceled.
But you did really great work with the character. So much great work. And I remember when we were talking with you years ago, I was like, man, I want you on the X books. Like you're such a talented writer. And again, you bring a lot of high stakes, a lot of humor, a lot of seriousness, and a lot of character dynamics that I think it's not easy to balance, especially when you're doing those monthly publications and keeping readers engaged. It's a tightrope act that it requires a certain level of skill set.
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance. It's that can be difficult to maintain.
Okay, well, Jed, before we let you go, we do
Sure,
have some listener questions that came in. We've answered most of them, but
sure.
I would be crucified if I didn't ask you some of them. And one of them that came in, a lot of people were asking, like, oh, you're going to talk to Jed. Is he aware that there's a rumor out there that you're going to be writing a Cyclops solo series?
I am absolutely not writing anything other than Avengers, X-Men, and Moon Knight right now.
Okay.
Having to do Avengers, X-Men, Doctor Strange, Moon Knight, and Bloodhound at once all almost killed me. So I am keeping it tight on these books.
No worries. Thank you for confirming that. They just want to know if you were aware of it, but thank you for going the extra
Uh,
mile for it.
no, I mean, if someone is uncharitable, they could refer to X-Men as the Cyclops solo book. But
Another question that came in that was really interesting, where a lot of people wanted to know, was there anyone on your roster when you were initially conceiving this book that just didn't quite make it in? Maybe they were just busy, or maybe once pieces were falling together, it didn't make sense to have the character there.
yeah, I mean, because I sort of solidified the team, and then Ryan came on, and he had some ideas about how a team should work visually and how they should work in action. And he's like, well, all your characters are pretty much the same size. They all move more or less the same way. That's not super, it's not super exciting or dynamic. It's not like, they always bring up the Fantastic Four. You've got like one big guy, you got a stretchy guy, you got a guy who's on fire who flies. And it's like this very dynamic lineup. So, for instance, that was where Juggernaut came from because, like, got to have a big guy on the team. And a lot of our big guys were not available. Juggernaut is also a character that's very recognizable, has got a lot of clout. Um, he's fun to look at, and I think there's something interesting in having not just a former supervillain on the X-Men, but someone who's not a mutant at all, but is so deeply connected with them, given his history with Charles and his history with the X-Men. So that's Juggernaut was in. For a while, I was really trying to figure out a place for Longshot on the team. It just
Oh,
didn't. It just didn't work. I think what one of the big shifts is I believe we had Frenzy on the team, but then we brought Juggernaut on, and like, well, we've already got two people with the same power set, so we swapped out Frenzy for Psylocke. Where I was like, well, that seems to make sense. I really like Frenzy, and I've always been kind of like I pitched a Dazzler on going back in Krakoa with Frenzy as essentially the like secondary character on it. But never went anywhere. But now she's got a home on X Force. No, sorry, X Factor.
yeah. Oh man, I forgot you did mention that. You did mention to us that you were thinking of a Dazzler book during the Krakoan era, back when we talked to you during Masters of
Yeah, I
Comic
mean,
Books. Oh,
yeah, that was. I mean, yeah, that was years and years ago. But
yeah.
yeah, so Frenzy is a character I always really like, and I have been trying to find a spot for, but ultimately it just didn't work out for X Men.
What's the other set of questions that came in revolved around your collaboration with Ryan? How's it working with Ryan? We know you'd like to really focus in on dialogue and characters, and how is it like, working out the action sequences with him, plotting? How is that relationship going?
That's been great. I mean, Ryan, he is so like visually geared that he picks out things that I don't even think about.
Hmm.
Like we said, the silhouettes of the team, the way they move, the way their powers work together, and he's just he's such an exciting artist. He's such a physical artist, so with such a kinetic style, which gives characters such impact, such weight that it's just really exciting seeing how he puts this stuff together. But it's not just that. Like, you see, that first page when he drew the factory for the first time. It's an incredible environment, and there's very little action going on there. It's not something that people usually credit Ryan for. It's usually like the big jumping scenes or the punches or whatever. But he's also a really versatile artist who could do so many different things. And also, there's times to be like, hey, what do you want to draw? It's like, I want to draw this character. I'm like, I hadn't thought about putting them in the book, but since you mentioned wanting to draw them, I could start connecting the dots and seeing how that actually would work out really well. So no, it's been great working with Ryan. I was hanging out with him last weekend at Fan Expo Canada. So yeah, he's a solid dude.
Jed, thank you so much for your time today. Where can fans hit you up on the social media?
I mean, not really anywhere. I mean, like, I'm on Twitter, but I've sort of uh, arranged my life so that no one can hit me up because I mean, I got work I got to do. I can't be answering questions on Twitter all day, or hearing complaints.
Wait, what? Wait, what do you mean complaints? Do people complain out there?
About the X Men, really?
What?
Yeah.
Wait, are X fans are we very vocal?
I mean, maybe I'll see it.
No, man, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Everyone's been so excited for you, Gail, Jason, everyone joining the X-Men. This is such an exciting era. We're just really happy to see where everything goes, and you guys are planting a lot of great seeds.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and Exceptional starts next month. But I mean, there's all kinds of great stuff. Like I know people are giving Sentinels a lot of shit, but I think that's going to be a great book. Alex is a super thoughtful writer.
No, man, I'm
And
so
the,
excited for
the
Sentinels. I have to
the
tell you, it's
concept,
one, oh God.
yeah, the concept behind it is so it's extremely clever stuff that I think people will hopefully really enjoy. And then Declan doing Mystique is going to be awesome. We talk about Psylocke, talk about Dazzler, the continuations of all the, we've got X Force, X Factor, all kinds of stuff. Got some, Phoenix. There's so much stuff going on, so there's got to be a book that if you're looking for an X book to read, that you're going to really enjoy.
Can
Hopefully
I
more than one.
can we ask a post-credit question here, which is Jean and Cyclops feels on
Yeah.
everything going on with them. Historically, they don't do so well with distance, and especially when the Phoenix is involved, they what can we expect out of Cyclops and Jean?
We're going to get into it more in the future. It's not something we're focusing on a whole lot right now because, given sort of its nature, X-Men is very much a what's in front of you sort of book. We're moving very fast. We're making big changes, and also with Phoenix ongoing, it can be hard to coordinate stuff like that without stepping on anybody's toes about the stories either of us want to tell. But as we go on, I have no doubt we're going to get into it even more.